Ah, the taste of instant coffee. Black instant coffee does the job. What's up, everybody? Looks like we're live. I'm going to take a couple moments to make sure the stuff is in the right place. Let's try out the chat. Hello, chat. Cool. So let's see what we have in store today. Eventually, we're going to read more of the Technological Society. Let me update these notes here, because that's the campaign we've been on. A long, difficult campaign. But I think it's been a rewarding one. Having just some kind of plan to go back to, some sort of syllabus, right? You could think of it kind of like we're all coming here together for a sort of college seminar. If any of you have been to a upper division or graduate level class, oftentimes what they have is these seminars where you'll have a relatively small class and people will all be discussing some papers or some book together. And oftentimes the people involved with these seminars, they might be planning or already doing their own research that is in some way linked to the material that's being discussed. So we're advanced metaverse studies here, and we're looking at the historical underpinnings for the metaverse. So thank you all for coming to my metaverse seminar. Pretty good. Okay, well, no chat messages yet, so I will start the program. And if anybody says anything in the chat, I will be monitoring the chat as I begin to go over some materials here. So let's see where to start. Okay, so one kind of fun thing that I've been doing here with this stream is taking recommendations for websites and content to look at from you all, which is cool. And a sort of methodology that we have is like sometimes in a web browser, do you open up many tabs, and some of them do not get read. They stay open for a long time. So here in this stream, we're going to have a kind of active queue where we do actually close the tab. So if I open something here, I do plan to get through it and we will read it. So first, I want to do a shout out promotion to a cool channel someone showed with me. This one, Krazam. They have these short comedy skits, less than 10 minutes long, but really packed with a lot of content related to internet, technology, stuff like this. And I found these skits to all be surprisingly, I will say, educational regarding the actual practice of how technology is done. So this skit, for instance, is titled Microservices. Microservices is a term used nowadays if you learn any programming for, instead of having one giant program, you write all these little microservices, and then you connect all those services together to create whatever user experience that you want to do, right? So for example, let's say you have a website like Facebook. Facebook might have a whole bunch of different services that come together to provide their product. Like one service handles all the photo uploads, and then another service handles the chat. Another service handles fact checking, whatever it might be. And then you'll have all these different modules that will come together to form a large complex application, as opposed to what might be called like a monolithic architecture where everything is brought together. Let's say you're programming for the Game Boy or something, some self-contained unit, then all the programming might be done within the same system using the same programming language and all of that. So anyways, if you're looking for a laugh and also looking for how the tech industry works in many ways, I recommend checking out this Krazam channel. Pretty cool. All right. The next set of tabs I had open was this site, TV Tropes. So this site is fun because like a lot of people, if you don't just watch TV shows or movies and things, but you also talk about them with friends, then you might suddenly notice a lot of patterns that are coming up. It's like, hey, did you notice that thing? Oh yeah, the plot is like this thing, right? There's patterns that we see. These patterns we could call tropes. So I just brought up here 2 tropes that are related to some of the topics that we've been discussing on this stream. So this first one, call it AI is a crapshoot. What does this mean? So I'll just read here. Whenever an artificial intelligence AI is introduced in a story, there is a very good chance that it will for whatever reason become evil and attempt to turn against its masters, kill all humans, and or take over the world. It doesn't matter what safeguards its creators install, the moment it crosses the line into sapience, it has a strong chance of going rogue at some point. So AI takeover, and then there could be a lot of different examples of this and also more tropes that you see throughout movies. And I don't know if those are... Do they have examples of movies? Example subpages. So maybe there's just so many things to go here that they have entire subpages dedicated to the examples. Anyways, it's funny to see stuff like this because mostly in this channel we haven't been looking at entertainment, so to speak. We've actually been looking at news stories, stuff like that, things that like Google or whoever will announce. They're announcing their qubit computer, their quantum computing, their AI advances, all these things. Then on the entertainment side, then you get people kind of having fun, maybe is one way to put it. You have these tropes, this theme that comes over that, oh yeah, they're making AI, but what if the AI is evil? So I think you could look at this and say it begs the question, like, so if I'm watching something and they have this AI as a crapshoot trope, then what am I supposed to say? Like, oh, I don't like Google. They said don't be evil, but then they're creating a thing that's probably going to be evil. Like, and then what? What are you supposed to do? So, interesting signaling. I don't really know what to say about the purpose of entertainment. We could let the artists themselves say that. All right. And then here, another thing from TV tropes. We have science is bad. So what is this science is bad about? We have a quote. Science never solves a problem without creating 10 more, by George Bernard Shaw. And I'll just read a paragraph or two. Most writers are not scientists, whether it is because they perceive science as cold and emotionless, or because they just dislike science and embrace literature after failing math in high school. Ludism is an awfully common philosophy in the arts community. The typical theme is that some sort of advanced scientific research has gone horribly wrong, creating a monster, causing an impending natural disaster and or a massive government cover-up. The heroes typically discover the side effects of the research and investigate, discovering what's going on and try to stop it. The antagonist, most always either corporate or military/government scientist, and not hot, refuses to believe that his work could so badly flawed and or immoral, or simply doesn't care about who gets hurt by it, insisting that the research is for science. They will generally use their influence with the government to make life difficult for the heroes. This can include trying to have them arrested and or otherwise silenced, while leading to a shootout, jailbreak, or chase scene, and so on and so forth. So, once again, this is interesting. I don't know what to make of it. You'll see this sort of thing all over the place in film, television, whatever we're talking about. But then, if you're actually going against the accepted science in some way in a real life, then suddenly, even if that's promoted as like a kind of heroic position in a movie, then it's serious. It's kind of weird. I mean, you could look at a lot of movies this way. Like a movie, people might criticize a movie and say, "Oh yeah, this movie it glorifies violence." These video games, they celebrate like killing people, and you're not allowed to do that in real life. So what is the point of showing it on the screen? Is it helping anyone? What's the point of it? And yeah, a lot of this stuff, like, it's okay to think science is bad in a video game, but then everybody in real life knows that scientists do no wrong. I don't know what the point is. So if anybody has any insights into this question, feel free to drop a note and let me know. But it's just kind of funny to me about how a lot of stuff that you can't really talk very much about if you're just talking about current events, news, what's being reported, it's not okay. But then it's all fun and games with entertainment. So very interesting. All right. So, yeah, I think that is good for now. We could get into our next topic. So the next topic I have, it was recommended that I look into what neoliberalism is. Now, I'm going to kind of make a meta point about looking into these various isms and stuff. I've met a number of people who identify with some kind of ism. I myself have had my favorite isms and stuff. For example, I like many of the ideas of like libertarianism. This is one of the isms I investigated a bit. But then after a while, basically I assume, I just don't like a lot of the stuff that the government where I am, California, is doing. So it's not so much that like I'm a libertarian and I identify with, this philosophical framework or whatever. It's just that, the government and stuff is doing a lot of stuff that's a real pain. So if they'd get out of the way and let people just be normal, that would be nice. But it wasn't the libertarian ideas so much as that the people in charge were doing stuff that I thought was wrong. That is how I sort of got past this in one way, so to speak. Nevertheless, I think that there's a lot of ism talk all over the internet, where people, they want to find like some little collection of ideas, something to identify with. So I'll just give an example of one that's associated with more like right-wing types. So for example, a lot of people, they say, I'm pro-free speech. All right, now we can look at throughout very recent history how the sort of people that would promote free speech have changed, right? So we could say maybe in the 50s or something, a lot of the people that would be pro liberty, pro free speech, what you might want to call that, they were what we would refer to as like left-wing liberal types now, because they would say, oh, you're being prudish. We should not ban like pornography or this rap music, all this sort of stuff. And now it's kind of different in the year 2021. I'm streaming this towards the end of the month in November. Now we see how there's a lot of more right-wing political people that are complaining and going pro-free speech and saying how they are being censored, which a lot of people, yeah, they are being censored. This is just a fact. They're being censored as misinformation. So here we could see like different people, different parties, they identify with maybe some idea more as a tool or a tactic, right? Or some action, as opposed to it makes sense for various groups at different times to be pro this or anti that, to get what they want to get done. So if you want to open a big casino and stuff, then you might become more libertarian, telling everybody about how you should be able to practice whatever business you want. But then let's pretend that person gets in power, and then they have a lot of people criticizing them. Then they might shift gears and no longer be so much pro-liberty, but say like, oh yeah, these people are defaming me, so we need to have stronger anti-defamation laws or something like that. Right. So practically, how do we apply this discussion about isms, such as neoliberalism? First, a note, and I'm making these notes to myself a lot of the time, but feel free to elaborate or comment on them. I think it is generally best not to call somebody an ism or an ist, right? So don't say like, "Oh, you're a communist," like with McCarthyism, the Red Scare, or "Oh, you're a neoliberal shill," whatever. I mean, maybe among friends as a joke, it could be okay. I don't know, but generally speaking, I don't think it's a good idea to do that. Now, on the other hand, if somebody calls themselves something, then this could be very useful, interesting information, because they are revealing something about their own position, which could be related to what they're trying to do. So if you have a person, and let's say they were like, I'm a communist or something, then their record of action show that they're operating with the Marxist playbook, basically, then this could be very useful information if you have to make decisions that depend on what this person is doing. Like, I'll just give a hypothetical here. Suppose some vegans, through some very clever maneuvering, some vegans gain a ton of power in the United States. Okay, now if a bunch of vegans gained power in the United States, it might be in your best interest to buy like Beyond Meat stock, to buy these sort of vegan alternative things, and then be able to turn a profit within a relatively short term, because you could expect that a person that self-identifies as a vegan or lives a vegan lifestyle and wants other people to do the same thing, that they are going to do certain actions that follow from that. And so you could use that knowledge that you have about, I know what vegans are and what they claim, and this person says they're vegan. You could use that knowledge to see what they're going to do, and then you could capitalize off of what they're going to be doing anyways. And everything is completely legal, voluntary. There's nothing shady about what I'm saying there. It's just this person, they say they're this, that sort of person by their ideology, they do this. And then you could look at, how do I act, knowing that it's very likely they're going to do this sort of action. Now, on the other hand, I think that, so for example, I'll just look at this Wikipedia article and just read one little section just to show you how tiring and insufferable these conversations about isms and is could be. There's going to be some blurb about, oh yeah, here we go. Here's blurb. The term has multiple competing definitions and a pejorative valence in policy making, blah, blah, blah. So you don't want to fall into what we could call the word concept fallacy. Word concept fallacy. So if two people, they say the same word, it doesn't necessarily mean the same thing, that they mean the same thing, right? Like if a critic is calling somebody a neoliberal versus if somebody self-identifies as a neoliberal, then they might actually mean quite different things from this term. Generally, I would say it's not helpful, right? You don't want to just provoke people and make them mad by name calling them, so that's why I made that first point. However, if somebody else is kind of being self-congratulatory, saying like, oh yeah, I picked a smart person ideology, and they self-identify something, then that you're going to have a more useful description from them about what it is that they believe, what they're doing, maybe even who funds them, that sort of thing. So as a better approach, like neoliberalism, what is it about? Term used to describe 20th century resurgence of 19th century's ideas with free market capitalism. And it has something to do with political parties and then, free trade. So it has to do with big macroeconomic things and free market capitalism, stuff like that. So I think instead of saying, oh, what exactly is neoliberal? I mean, it could be useful if someone announces themselves as that and then says what policies they like. But maybe a more useful approach to take is to study a field such as like global trade or monetary policy, and then look at the different approaches people take. So it's more like saying, what are the strategies and tactics, instead of going in and studying like what are all these different names of strategies and tactics people say. Instead, survey the area, learn as much about the field broadly, and then learn about specific cases of what sort of strategies and tactics people have employed. And then later, if you want to, you could see how analysts and stuff will group people together into like a school of thought, like neoliberalism, whatever you want to call it. So that's my rather discursive rant about this. Oh, and then the other thing, last point I had here was look at the people associated with some label, such as neoliberal. What attitudes do people we are reading want us to have towards those people? So, for instance, if you're reading an article and it's about how communists are bad guys, and then it tells you like who the communists are, then clearly that article is like saying communism is bad and these are the bad guys, right? Likewise, if we stumble across a term like neoliberalism, ask who is using that word and why. And I think a lot of the times it'll be like, I'm smart, my ideas are good, and I don't like that person, and they're a neolib, something like that. Oh, cool. We have a message here from Hello. He says, howdy. Neoliberal, like neoconservative, tend to be used as a smear term. However, some people have been reclaiming the terms. Yeah, so good point here by Hello. I would say, right, so if this term becomes relevant, look at who's reclaiming the terms and then hear why they're reclaiming the terms and what they're going to do. Insofar as you do that, and you could see like what they're likely to fund, where they're going to go, what they're going to buy, this sort of stuff. In this specific sense, I think that looking into a term like what does neoliberal mean could be useful. But if you're just like, oh yeah, I know all the definitions for all the political terms, that's pretty not useful to do. And even worse is if like you just go around and get mad at people for not using terms correctly. That's a quick way to not get invited to parties. So cool. I think that will do it for this discussion here of the term neoliberalism. So, like, for example, here on this stream, if somebody like has shared with me an article about somebody who says how they're a neoliberal, and then they talk about the policies they like, then we could go ahead and read that. But one thing we're not going to do here on the stream is be like, I don't know, I don't like Hillary Clinton because she's a neoliberal. Like, that's not very helpful to do. Now, on the other hand, it says like, oh yeah, this person says they're a neoliberal, and they're gonna buy up all the pinto beans. So if you go to the store now and buy the cans of beans you're gonna buy anyways, and then you'll get them at a cheaper price, and you could sell them for 20% profit later. Then hey, we just talked about something that's useful and profitable, and also we learned a use of neoliberal while we're doing it. All right, couple comments. We have Hello here. He says, I very much agree with the association. It gets murky for terms like fascist, though. I think the movement is really specific to the 1920s to 40s in Europe, but many agree, including some historians. Yeah, exactly. So we shouldn't lock onto some one definition for a term. Instead, look at who's saying it, why are they saying it, and what sense they're using it. And if they're just pulling polemics and wasting our time, then don't regard them. Andrew says howdy. Howdy to Andrew. Wow, we're all speaking American today. That's cool. Howdy to everyone. Hello, Reaper. Reaper says, OMG, I joined just when neoliberals are evil meme is being discussed. No, Reaper. You missed the discussion. We're not saying that neoliberals are evil. We're saying let neoliberals tell us who they are, the people that self-identify as neoliberals, but let us not name call and tell somebody they're a neoliberal and just apply our mean thoughts to them. Instead, let us not apply these labels, but if somebody is describing themselves and saying what they're going to do, okay, it might be useful to hear what they have to announce. Hello says, I think these shortcuts are actually useful, but it's also important to gatekeep them a bit, since accusations of socialism and fascism tend to be toxic to discourse. Yeah, I think too, like with a lot of these terms, people like to sometimes throw around fancy terms, identify under some banner, some label. Another thing to ask too is like, in what manner are you positioned to actually do something about the subject you're talking about? So I'll just give an example of an ism, okay? I'll type it up here on the screen too. So you may have heard the word minimalism, something like that. I'm sure if you read a bunch of tech nerds, self-help books, whatever it is, you'll come across this word minimalism eventually. Now, I think that when we have different people talking about what minimalism of some kind means, it will often not be totally stupid, because people are actually talking about something that they have some say over, right? Like your own life. So, for example, if Hello said to me, oh yeah, I heard these ideas about minimalism, so I'm trying to simplify my life and not have like 2 pairs of sneakers if I only need 1 pair of sneakers, and so on and so forth. Then I imagine this would be a much more pleasant conversation to have, like somebody who's taking some idea such as minimalism and actually trying to do something useful with it, as opposed to just going on Reddit and arguing about like different flavors of socialism. Because if you're not there making the policies for like nations, and we aren't like commodities traders or something, like people who are making some sort of big economic deal, then I don't think often much profit is going to come out of that discussion. It's just going to be like quibbling over words. Whereas if there is something at stake, like that person has something at stake in being right directly with their own life, with discussing something, then I think that the quality of the conversation tends to go up. Cool. Hello says, there's also the thing programmers say for types that looks like a duck, walks like a duck, is a duck thing. Yeah, that would be called duck typing. So I think this point is referring to, like, we'll use the neoliberal example. So if we say, oh yeah, a neoliberal acts in such and such and such and such way, and then you find someone that in all ways shows their true colors, that they're acting like a neoliberal, you might be like, bruh, like, dude, you're a neoliberal. But maybe a more helpful way to frame it would be like, I'm going to give you this document, read these 3 paragraphs, and tell me if this sounds like how you feel, the position you identify with. And don't tell them that, you copied it from a definition of neoliberal. And then if they're like, yeah, really, that does sound like me. Then you say, I'm like, well, bro, what you're saying is in line with this thing called neoliberal. So if you want to quickly summarize and find people you like, just find people that associate with this label, because that's what you sound like. So I think that could bring it all full circle to just say, like, yeah, there of course is a legitimate useful ways where names and labels and these things. I'm not anti-name, anti-label, right? We want to use these things properly, and but we do have to know your audience such that you don't get in a semantics quibble with people, which I think anybody who has tried to do any sort of writing or debate or that sort of thing on the internet, probably at least once you've been sucked into that type of vortex. And if you haven't, then that's cool. You're not missing out. Cool. All right, looks like we don't have any additional comments right away, so I'm going to transition into Jacques Ellul here. And we're looking at the section on the Industrial Revolution. And let's see if I could quickly summarize what we talked about last time here. Yeah, so the period that he calls the Industrial Revolution, it came following what we could call the Age of Exploration. The Age of Exploration was like, think Spanish armadas, people going on ships going around the world. So you weren't having like huge machines and stuff and a radical transformation of society like the automobile brought, but you were starting to see a lot of the evolutions with the current, like similar variants on existing forms, might be one way to put it, where like people had boats for a long time, but now you have boats that travel longer, that go faster, that carry more, stuff like that. And then going up into the Industrial Revolution period, then we start to see stuff that hadn't been seen before, whether it's like steam engines or even soon to come electric power, that sort of stuff. So let us look more at what Jacques Ellul has to say about it. Okay, so I'm just going to start from this line. The philosophy of the 18th century did indeed favor technical applications. It was naturalistic and sought not only to know but also to exploit nature. It was utilitarian and pragmatic. It concerned itself with easing human life, with bringing more pleasure into it and simplifying its labor. For the 18th century, man's life was narrowly confined to the material. It seemed evident that the problem of life would be resolved when men were able to work less while consuming more. The goal of science thus appeared to be fixed by philosophy. Okay, let me just pause here for a second. All right, this was the main point that I ended last stream. I didn't recall it right at first, but we've been talking about optimizing on this stream. So now with data science, functions, all these things, now we have a lot of quantitative techniques to optimize for particular things. So here we have a description of how during this 18th century period, there was an optimization for doing less work. So I think the most obvious sorts of work that is worky work would be you're exerting physical effort, right? You to travel distances, if you have to run, if you want to smash rocks, you got to use a rock smasher, pickaxe, whatever it is. Like these are all obvious forms of work, labor, whatever you want to call it. So going into the 18th century and stuff, we're seeing the development of a lot of machines that would mean less work for people in this sense and more consumption. So if you have technology to do mass production, and techniques for people to do less work, then yeah, like less work, more production. You're optimizing for more leisure in the sense of not doing work and more consumption. So one question to ask. Let me phrase it a different way. You could ask a question like, why? So all the machines and stuff, these things, they were developed in Europe in this period. Like a lot of these things were developed in this particular time and in this particular place. Why is that? Now, I think a kind of brainlet, not very advanced way to explain this might be to say like, well, Europeans are just like the smartest people ever, so they could come up with these clever machines and stuff, and then everybody else was not as smart, so they couldn't. So if you go and sort of some neo-pagan kind of racist people hear what they have to say, you're likely to get that sort of talking point advanced by somebody there. Now, why do I not think that that's right? Well, we have to look. Like, there have been a lot of people groups for a long time, and you could say in their lifetimes, what are the things that people would want to accomplish? So one answer to that might be that rather than having to do like create machines and stuff so that you do less work and you consume more, right? Maybe you have a people group and their culture, what they're trying to do is to do like good work, meaningful work, and consume an appropriate amount. So maybe have some food stored up for later, but not produce an excess such that you have like rotting food, extra trash, right? So finding a kind of moderate middle way. Now, for such people, let's say your civilization is doing that, then maybe you don't want to develop any of these machines or anything, because your problem isn't that you don't produce enough, right? Maybe your problems are more like sometimes the weather is not favorable, sometimes the weather is favorable. So it's not a question of like having techniques for maximum production that you would be concerned about, but maybe it's, right, how do we properly manage our economy? How do we have like good work so that we don't damage the field, so we could replicate the process that we're doing, so we could do it for next year. You might have problems like, all right, I know I'm only going to live 70 years, so how do I pass down my property through my family for my children, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of reasons why somebody would be concerned about stuff other than optimizing production and doing minimal labor. And then, of course, like nowadays, one interesting irony of our era is like people will work their 9 to 5, and ambitious people that want the best of their life, oftentimes they'll go to the gym. They'll try to be healthy in a way, so they're doing some sort of work where they actually don't get anything done except for the training that they're giving for their body. But if they, had a job where they could work a field or something, maybe they could have done all these things at once. Yet instead, we have tons of people who are sitting in cubicles looking at those nice Windows wallpapers of scenic outdoor places we might want to go to from indoors. So it's kind of funny, like trying to make all this like less work and stuff. And then what you find is people are actually searching for more work in a sense, but just the work kind of leisure coupling, the nature of work has been transformed. All right, we have a message from Hello. He says, I've missed some episodes, but I understand the definition of technique is very broad and includes pre-industrial machinery. There are many non-European industrial era examples of this. For example, I recently learned of nixtamalization through a video by Wired. It is crazy complicated technique by the Aztecs who make corn nutritious and easy to digest. It shows up our current methods. Right. So I think this is a good example brought up by Super. You could look at the technology that has been developed in the West and then technologies that are developed elsewhere. And you could say, what is the whole point of the thing that you're doing, right? So in the West, right, let's look at an example of steam engine, a locomotion, bigger, stronger, faster. Um, but then at the end of the day, do you dream of riding a horse? Right. In the same way with all this food stuff, you could have more food produced, greater quantity, like all these different varieties. But then at the end of the day, then you might have these Aztecs, and their quantity per hour output or whatever you might say is not so great. But they have these techniques that are able to produce this really special thing that like gajillions of dollars of science might not be able to give you. So interesting point there. All right, let's continue. Jacques Ellul. He says, this philosophy was concrete. It was bound up with material results. What cannot be seen cannot be judged, and this explains the centuries' judgment of history, that the foundation of civilizations is technique, not philosophy or religion. All right, so instead of asking, like, why am I producing more? Why am I seeking to consume more? They threw all that philosophy and religion out of the window and they became a bunch of nerds. That's our Western heritage, becoming a bunch of nerds. All right, let's continue. For these admirable philosophers, technique had the enormous superiority of manifesting itself in a concrete way and of leaving its tracks for all to read. Voltaire and Diderot were its principal exponents. But I am unable to give this philosophy the highest place in the history of the development of technique. It played a role, but it was not the prime force behind the technical movement. To say it would be to exaggerate the force of these philosophic ideas and systems, which affected only a small minority of Frenchmen and a minute elite abroad. The technical movement was a European movement. The ideas of this philosophical minorities could scarcely have penetrated Europe such a way as to make evident to everyone the excellence of technical progress. We have only to recall popular reactions to machinery, for example, to Vaucanson's loom, to the first steamboat, and to the first blast furnaces. These philosophic ideas scarcely suffice to explain the remarkable mobilization of all human forces in the 19th century. It is even questionable whether this philosophy was universally accepted. At other times, there have been utilitarian currents in philosophy, but they represented only one branch of philosophy among several, and did not lead to such radical transformations of society. Okay, so the super nerds that wanted to optimize and make the bigger, faster, stronger, what they did led to radical transformations of society. Right, couple comments by Super. He says, Max Weber had words to say about philosophy and religion as the driver of civilization. Yeah, I think during this period we get a lot of interesting people, German and French people and English people that say stuff about this. If you come up with any interesting quotes or something, feel free to pass them by. I think a point that Jacques Ellul here is making that relates to what you're saying is that there's a lot of this rhetoric that, okay, now we're doing this thing and we know we're the best and that we're past these old questions. Like, for instance, with respect to religion, right? If you're saying now we got all these machines, we have all this excess and we don't have to work very much, therefore, we're done with God, right? You might get some crazy technologist scientist person coming up with that idea, like, oh yeah, we have rocket ships, therefore, the religion was all superstitious. People come to have this sort of thought. So looking at people that wax on about like science and technique and these sorts of things, then I think another thing to look is study their writings and try to determine not just what they say they don't like, but look at what are their positive beliefs. What is it that not only are they schools or things that they dismiss, but what are they the positive beliefs they have. What do they actually hold to be true about the world? So let's continue. Jacques Ellul says, The optimistic atmosphere of the 18th century, more than this philosophy, created a climate favorable to the rise of technical applications. The fear of evil diminished. Oh, good translation or transition here. There was an improvement in manners, a softening of the conditions of war, an increasing sense of man's responsibility for his fellows, a certain delight in life, which was greatly increased by the improvement of living conditions in nearly all classes except the artisans. The building of fine houses in great numbers, all these helped persuade Europeans that progress could only be achieved by the exploitation of natural resources and the application of scientific discoveries. Okay, so here we have a description of, maybe we could call it the Zeitgeist, right? What is the spirit of the times? How are people looking at and feeling about stuff? So we see an optimistic atmosphere and the fear of evil, and I think evil in this sense is talking about like people harming each other, things like that. And one of the obvious reasons why this might be is because if you have a lot more material abundance in some ways, if there's enough bread for everybody, who is going to steal bread, right? Because you have bread in abundance. If everybody could have like an automobile, then maybe you don't have to be jealous of your neighbor's automobile because everybody has an automobile. This sort of idea. And this is related to the metaverse here. So this is how we could relate this with digital stuff. With digital assets, then you don't even have the same scarcity issues like, could everybody have a giant gold chair or something like that? In the real world, no, because there's not enough gold to go around, and some people can't afford it, and so on and so forth. But in like metaverse land, then it could be any sort of luxury of the metaverse is really available to everybody. I mean, there might be some slight variations, but more or less it's like everybody gets the thing. Just like anybody, we could all make a Facebook account. We all enjoy the luxury of instant communication, whatever you want to call it. All right. Comment by Hello. Hello says, Max Weber wrote that the engine of economic development was due to the Calvinist work ethic. When he looked at the most successful countries, that the religion encouraged hard work and embedded this. This is the very simple version. Contrast with the Catholic relationship to salvation, which is more about abstaining than doing. Interesting. I don't know enough about the Roman Catholic and the Calvinists specifically to speak to the specifics of whether or not that's true, but I would say that this we could say it's a meme. The meme of the Protestant work ethic is still, I think, quite widespread in the United States, and like as these groups came from Europe, I'm sure in Europe people are familiar with the idea too. And I think this goes with this idea of building machines. So work ethic in the sense of let's produce. And if you want to make more and more and more production, then clearly to have machines that could aid to do that at greater volumes, greater scale, and so on and so forth, to have machines to aid in that. So the work ethic combined with the machines, right, sounds like it would be an unstoppable combination for somebody that believes that part of their life mission, so to speak, is to do a lot of this production. All right, Hello says, General Weber's take is the opposite to this. This is very positivist. He was anti-positivist in his analysis. Okay, interesting. Well, if you find like an interesting essay or something by him that you think might be interesting to discuss on the stream, I'd be more than happy to take a look at what he has to say. We could pull up his Wikipedia at least. So I think he's a Max Weber. Okay, German sociologist. historian, jurist, political economist, and is regarded among the most important theorists of the development of modern Western society. All right, and he's born 1864, died in 1920. All right, unlike Emil Durkheim, Weber did not believe in monocausal explanations, proposing instead for any outcome there can be multiple causes. And as Hello points out, anti-positivism here. Let's see. He was a key proponent of methodological anti-positivism, arguing for the study of social action through interpretive rather than purely empiricist methods based on understanding the purpose and meanings that individuals attach to their actions. Okay, so this is so far, this description here is in line with what Hello is saying about anti-positivists. So looking at meanings, looking at these qualitative. Hello says, i.e. techniques weren't important, that the culture that created them is what led to the prosperity. Yeah, okay. So I could see how you're saying that, how Max Weber is looking at stuff is quite different from the Jacques Ellul technique obsession stuff. All right, I'll leave this window open because it might be interesting to look at a take on stuff that is pretty, on the face value at least, it seems to be quite opposite, quite different from Mr. Jacques. All right. We'll continue, though, with Jacques Ellul, and we'll take a look at other stuff later. It becomes relevant. So, continuing, this state of mind created in the second half of the 18th century, so talking about the optimism, seeing how material excess or material abundance meant fear of evil diminished, this sort of thing. Created in the second half of the 18th century a kind of good conscience on the part of scientists who devoted their research to practical objectives. They believed that happiness and justice would result from their investigations, and it is here that the myth of progress had its beginning. Okay, so here let's think about progress. So if we have a lot of human problems because people steal because there's not enough stuff, people like lie, cheat, and people do bad things, have wars over limited resources, all of this, then if you could use the technology and stuff to make more abundance, then you could have progress in the sense that you're taking away the fuel for the fire for war. If people fight wars because there's not enough, then you give everybody more, then maybe people do not fight wars anymore. Continuing, it is clear that this atmosphere was favorable to technical development, but in itself it was not enough. How then are we to explain the sudden blossoming of technique in the 19th century? The 18th century was only the preliminary phase of technical application. The 19th century is the really interesting period. I feel that this transformation of civilization can be explained by the conjunction in time of 5 phenomena: the fruition of a long technical experience, population expansion, the suitability of the economic environment, the plasticity of the social milieu, and the appearance of clear technical intention. All right, to spice up the stream a little bit, I want to point out that just as we've been talking about like cyberpunk with the metaverse as a kind of theme, a sort of smaller but thing that trended is this stuff called steampunk. And this is modeled after 19th century industrial steam-powered machinery. So a lot of people think that steampunk stuff looks cool. So I'm just going to pull up some links that might have some visuals. And so just as people might celebrate cyberpunk and show all these visions that they think are cool, even if there's a lot of these dystopian elements, in a similar way, right, you have steampunk, which is kind of parallel in the sense that 19th century, big polluting smokestacks, child labor, all these things that we would regard as pretty unpleasant, dirty, not good, associated with the high tech of their time. So they both have that punk, the high tech, low life blend. Only they're set in a different time period. So I think like the images of this steampunk stuff might be relevant for understanding how people have thought the same sorts of things to be cool. Yeah, so here, image of like got some spectacles, some steam pipe things, some science hero type person, a giant walking elephant, Les Machines de Lille in France. Alright, and then they had some convention. Alright, a keyboard here, some steam looking technology with the fancy lamp. So clearly not as much for this stuff like widespread as all of the cyberpunk stuff. But I think that looking at this artwork, you could see that similar sorts of themes are celebrated, right? Atmospherically, with the cyberpunk stuff, like it's often night and it's often rainy. Here you have these like dark, stormy streets. Here it doesn't look so dark and stormy. You have the optimism of progress, but then front and center, this big train titled Illustrious Lady. Okay, here, yeah, night, raining, appearance of electric lamps. So I think in many ways, similar aesthetic. So you don't have giant neon billboards with Asian languages, but you have other evocative images of this 19th century stuff. And you have the anime people putting in the anime stuff. Brass instruments, balloons, flying stuff, airplanes, things like that. So I think it's cool. Like even even in this century, when you look at how people are reflecting on and talking about a previous period in time, such as the 19th century, contemporary artists are visualizing and celebrating these same sorts of themes that we hear Jacques Ellul talk about, how people of his day thought were cool, and also how he's describing the intellectual powerhouses of the 19th century and stuff. Alright, so that's enough flipping through some artwork. You could search up these things on the aesthetics fandom later if you're interested. Let us return to the text. So Jacques Ellul writes, the first of these factors must not be neglected. Every modern technical application had ancestors. Arthur Vierendeel and Lewis Mumford have analyzed these preparations. Every invention has its roots in a preceding technical period. And every period bears in itself not only the trivial residue, but also the valuable survivals of past technologies and the nuclei of new ones. What appears to be genuinely new is the formation of a, quote, technical complex, end quote, which according to Mumford consists of a series of partial inventions that combine into an ensemble. This unit begins to function when the greatest number of its constituents have been assembled, and its trend is towards continuous self-perfection. From 1000 to about 1750, there had been a slow fermentation which had no immediate consequences, but which had amassed materials in every area of life. All right, let's see. Maybe they'll give some examples of some of these technologies that come together and in an ensemble. And after looking over this section, we could talk about the current iteration of this with Zuck and the metaverse, and how a lot of the technologies that are going into his dream there have been being prepared for a long while. All right, continuing Jacques. He says they had only to be drawn on for the technical miracle to take place. This continuity has been analyzed by Vurendeel in particular, and Wiener emphasized it when he writes, "It is interesting to reflect on the fact that every tool possesses a genealogy and is the result of the tools which serve to make it. This enormous sum of experiments, of apparatus, of inquiries was put to use abruptly at the end of an evolutionary period which had lasted for nearly 10 centuries without social catastrophe. Continuity of this kind was important because it made unnecessary the transmission of the technical legacy from one civilization to another, an operation which inevitably involves the loss of a part of it, especially a part of the social forces that apply to non-technical area." Okay, I'm scrolling down. I need him to say something more concrete. Right. Growth of population. People need stuff. Scrolling. Social milieu. So he's talking about various conditions and stuff that gotta be in place for some technological change to come about, some big change, very structure of society. Man has to have a need to want to bring about some change. All right. I'm waiting for Jacques Ellul to get snappier with his prose here. Atomization, society leading to greater plasticity. Yeah, you make everybody a nerd by themselves on the computer, then suddenly you could apply more changes to society. Makes sense. Social plasticity. Kind of break up cohesion people have with each other, then you could implement some changes. All right. You get a spirit of invention. Giedion said of the period from 1750 to 1850, invention was a part of the normal course of life. Everyone invented. Every entrepreneur dreamed of more rapid and economic means of fabrication. The work was done unconsciously and anonymously. Nowhere else had, and never before was the number of inventions per capita as great as in America in the 60s of that century. Okay, so this sounds like startup bro culture. It's like, oh, what are you guys interested in? Oh, we're interested in innovation. Hey, do you have an app for that? Hey, do you have a, oh, I have a software service for that. Do you have an app? Do you have an app for that? So if we're talking about what are the components that go into making the society ripe for a big transformation, as a lot of the stuff that I was skimming over here and Jacques Ellul said, right, in our current age, we could look at parallels for that. If you want to see big societal changes, what is the pattern that has been successfully employed in the past? One of the things is to have a lot of people that are interested in a kind of revolution of sort, technical disruption. Oh, what's going to be the next disruptive technology? So here it's talking about it in terms of fabrication. So maybe machines aiding in manufacturing to upend previous industries. Then in the same way, in our current age, we could look at how digital technologies and the development of all these like big tech stuff has followed a similar pattern. All right. Scrolling some more. All right, here's a spicy line. Moreover, the bourgeois were so aware of the relation between economic success and the scientific foundations of that success that they kept in their own hands, almost as a monopoly, the instruction was the only means of access to the great schools and faculties that trained the technicians of science and the technicians of society. Technical progress is a function of bourgeois money. Yet today the Marxists claim that the bourgeois either have attempted to restrain technical progress or make it serve the purposes of war. Their claim, however, does not prevent history from contradicting their theories. Marx himself would never have made such statements. What is true today was not true in his time. Yeah, so this discussion of the bourgeois is interesting. Let's actually look at a definition for who exactly is considered bourgeois. Bourgeois. Okay. Bourgeoisie is a sociologically defined social class equivalent to the middle or upper middle class. They are distinguished from and traditionally contrasted with the proletariat. So the wage earners, the member of society whose only possession of significant economic value is their labor power, by the relative affluence, and their cultural and financial capital. They are sometimes divided into petit, petite, middle, moyenne, grand, upper, haute, and ancient, ancien, bourgeois, which are collectively designated the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie, in its original sense, is intimately linked to the existence of cities, recognized as such by their urban charters. For example, municipal charters, town privileges, German town law, so there was no bourgeois apart from the citizenry of the cities. Okay, so, right, I think kind of like urban professionals would typically fall into this. Think of like people go to college to enter this sort of bourgeois class, right? You want to be some kind of manager. You don't actually make sandwiches and flip burgers, but if you are the person who's doing and designing the corporate campaign, you work on acquisitions, you do all this sort of stuff, then you would fall under this class by what you do. So here, the great schools and faculties that trained the technicians of science and the technicians of society, technical progress is a function of bourgeois money. So if you get a lot of wealth and power concentrated in the people whose livelihood depends on pushing and developing technique, then that basically equals the expanding middle class. So this is very interesting as an American, because I think a lot of the times we'll talk about how the struggling middle class, the division between the rich and the poor, stuff like that. So what is it that we mean by like the middle class in the United States? I think oftentimes people talk about the middle class in terms of like, do you have enough money to do certain stuff? For example, can you have like, do you feel comfortable? Do you have enough money to have like multiple children, to have pets, to go on vacation sometimes? If you answer yes to all of the above and you have a lawn, then you are middle class, something like that. But if we look at instead of what middle class means by what you're doing, like your occupation, that sort of stuff, then we could also see how in America, the expansion of like corporate white collar work in America, right? This is a lot of families and stuff that probably weren't traditionally middle class in this regard became middle class. So you had like a huge explosion of middle class type thinking and work. Whereas in the past, like I don't have numbers and stats to back this up, but it's probably true that like most people were they did agriculture, labor, various things, but you would have a lot more workers proportionally, because you would have more workers than managers, basically, is what I'm saying. And of course, life has all its difficulties, right? But maybe a lot of the material comforts we talk about is characteristic of middle class. Like even lower classes would have that. That's why they would be so numerous because people would have a lot of like children in the house. They might not have like a lot of nice things, like all sorts of problems. But a lot of the things that maybe even a middle class person now would struggle to have, then people in the past might have those things abundantly. Whereas now, even poor people have an iPhone, right? Even poor people have high tech stuff. But then if you're really, really poor, then there's probably you're probably not a landowner, for instance, or you wouldn't be really poor by definition. So it's even interesting to see here, looking at the Jacques Ellul text, how term like bourgeois, right, as the society and what people do and how roles align and all this have shifted. Then likewise, we could see how the concentration of capital, who owns land, all these other things have shifted around over time. Maybe the recent American expansion of white collar, expansion of suburbia, technicians rising sort of thing. This was a very exceptional historical event. Right. It's like an experimental special thing. All right, there I fell into the trap of American exceptionalism. Oh, wait, criticism from Europeans and others. But I'm just talking about the place that I see the most around me, the United States, the burbs and stuff, because that's what's near me. So anyone feel free to correct the record or say insightful things with respect to that. Okay. Continuing Jacques Ellul here. So he says, however, this self-interest of the bourgeoisie was not enough to carry the whole of society along with it. Witness the popular reactions against technical progress. As late as 1848, one of the demands of the workers was the suppression of machinery. So maybe you get more power with the bourgeoisie than the people that typically belong to the classes below the bourgeoisie, including laborers and stuff. They did not like robo takeover. Oh, hello says, sorry I got off the train and had to deal with annoying drunk people. Regarding steampunk versus cyberpunk, it's key to emphasize the punk in cyberpunk. You can't have just cyber alone. It needs to have the rough, poor streets. Right, yeah. I think the phrase I heard with regards to the cyberpunks that they say like high tech, low life, right? So you have, cheap fried Chinese noodle. You go and you eat that while seeing a drunk guy get beat up on the street, and then you go and you get your like cybernetic upgrade, and then some business people walk by in suits, and then you hear a siren go by because there's a crime scene next to you. Yeah, so the punk part, the rough poor streets, is extremely it's one of the key defining parts of this aesthetic. That's a good point from Hello. Hello says, cyberpunk is born from speculative fiction, while steampunk is born from fantasy. In steampunk, everyone is an adventurer, engineer, or artist. Okay, yeah. Hey, this is an interesting point. So, and this relates directly with Jacques Ellul talking about like magic and technique, right? So cyberpunk, maybe some fans of it think of it more like science as opposed to fantasy and magic. But then you could see how if you aren't actually like in the practice of doing the thing, you're creating aesthetics, visuals, right? Technology and magic, they could mesh as one. So the sort of thing that people end up doing at the end of the day is similar. So in steampunk, Hello said, yeah, everyone's an adventurer, an engineer, an artist. We could ask, like in cyberpunk, then what is everybody? I guess adventurer, kind of like some motorhead, driving car, wanderer. Engineer, of course, there's like technician, operator, machines, like drone hacker, whatever. The artist one, I'm not so sure about that. Maybe like plastic surgeon or something. We'll have to look more into the cyberpunk stuff. Hello says, it's Brave New World to Lord of the Rings, both a type of fantasy, but one makes you question the future while another uplifts you. Reaper says, cyberpunk was defined by Blade Runner, which is defined by Tokyo. All right, Reaper. Well, who defined Tokyo? Tell me that. All right, I'm caught by clickbait. Let me see what Jacques Ellul has to say about Karl Marx really quick. So Jacques Ellul writes, in the middle of the 19th century, the situation changed. Karl Marx rehabilitated technique in the eyes of the workers. So before, in the previous couple paragraphs, we were learning about like angry workers hating machines. So what does Karl Marx do to make workers say, no, actually, let me have that Amazon Alexa in my room? What did Karl Marx say? Right. He preached that technique can be liberating. Those who exploited it enslaved the workers. But that was the fault of the masters and not of technique itself. Marx was perhaps not the first to have said this, but he was the first to convince the masses of it. The working class would not be liberated by a struggle against technique, but on the contrary, by technical progress itself, which would automatically bring about the collapse of the bourgeoisie and of capitalism. The reconciliation of the masses to technique was decisive, but it would not have been sufficient to result in a clear consciousness of technical objective, the new consensus omnium. Had it not appeared simultaneously with a second historical fact, namely the diffusion of the so-called benefits of technique among the masses. These benefits included, for example, the conveniences of daily life, the progressive shortening of the workday, facilities for public transportation and medicine, new possibilities of making one's fortune in the United States and in the colonies, housing improvements, and so forth. Prodigious upheaval took place between 1850 and 1914, which convinced everyone of the excellence of a technical movement that could produce such marvels and alter human life. All this, Marx argued, presaged and even better things and pointed to the road to follow. Fact and theory were once in agreement. How could public opinion resist? Ooh, spicy rhetoric. Let's turn back to the chat. Hello says, you made an amazing point that they are both futurist in a way. Never considered that. Just one is optimistic while the other is not. Yeah, because steampunk, I guess by definition, like steampunk, we can't say that it's optimistic because it's about it's like a fantasy about a bygone era, right? So it's not so much optimistic, but it's like, oh, wouldn't that be cool if... Oh man, deep topics here. More things to talk about. Okay, Reaper says the heyday of punk rock was the mid-late 70s. I guess maybe cyberpunk is tied to that era in some way. Okay, yeah, so here I think Reaper makes a good point. If we're looking at the etymologies of these words, how they name these things, if we look at who the punks were and what the punks have to say, that might be interesting. So I'm actually going to add that to future topics. I'm going to add the punks. And I'm also going to add, let's add genres, and we could consider what the fantasy versus speculative fiction. That might be an interesting topic to do. Cool. All right, we got all sorts of stuff here, so I'll just summarize this Marx rant thing one more time. And I think we could close it up on there because we got a whole bunch of more juicy, interesting topics that we could look more into and show some cool stuff with. So here, Jacques Ellul's making the claim that Marx basically sold optimism about technique and stuff to the masses because with technology and stuff, technology is not your enemy. It could give you all these things. And I think this goes back to this philosophical and religious stuff in this way. We're talking about how there's this idea that with technology, maybe if there's such abundance that people are not going to be fighting over resources and stuff anymore. You know, there's bread for everybody. No need to steal a loaf of bread because there's loaves of bread for everybody, right? You have this wealth, then could it be not everybody gets to win? It's not winner take all, because if you have so much abundance, then there's nothing, there's no all for the winner to take. You could only eat so much bread. So for workers who have to labor, to struggle to get enough bread to live, to survive, and so on and so forth, you could sell them on technique, these things, by saying, look, this technique and stuff, it's not there to destroy you, but it's here to give you something so that you could abundantly enjoy the fruits. So embrace technology, this sort of thing. Let's just tie this in really quick with Zuck and the metaverse and all that sort of stuff, right? I think that one difference that we're seeing in our current era is when Zuck and these people, they say, oh, NFT, metaverse, all this sort of stuff. I would say that the general consensus among like most people I know is, while people might watch movies, accept these things, like if you gave somebody a choice between being the richest person on the internet or like having some really nice like real actual mansion, and you were just going to give it away for free, I think like pretty much everybody would actually choose the real thing in this era still. So people are not convinced that the technology and the results that the technology could bring are that much better and cooler. The people are not ready for the tech alternatives now. So during this period, the like 19th century, 18th century that we're talking about, then people already know that stuff like bread or whatever is good. Bread's good, chairs are good. These are useful things that we all want. So if you have to sell technology with a promise that everybody gets these things before, maybe I have one nice chair, but then 3 cheap chairs. I wish I could have more nice chairs. Then if you sell them on the promise that this technology will mean chair production becomes cheaper so everybody could have nice chairs, then people already want those nice chairs. So you could sell that dream to people. Now I think a problem that Zuck is coming up with the metaverse and all these things is that people look at like metaverse, these digital goods and stuff, and it's not evident to people in the same way that, oh, I would like more of this digital wealth is actual wealth. A lot of people think it's all fake and like bullshitty. So a project that remains to be done with Zuck and the metaverse, Microsoft, all these people, is to convince people that there actually is wealth behind this metaverse digital 3D stuff. And as we've been talking about on this stream, all the financial rewards, even forcing people into the system. They got a lot up their sleeves. We'll be seeing a lot of interesting stuff working out. But this point I'm making here is one way in which maybe Marx had an easier project to do, telling people to embrace the technique optimization than our current leaders do. All right, Hello says, how do you tie your dislike of chairs with back to this essay? Hello. So Hello's referring that I wrote this essay about how I thought chairs were overrated. Sadly, I'm a sellout. As you can see, I'm using a chair right here. I'm no longer sitting on the floor all the time, though I do sit on the floor a lot. And that chair, as you see, it's not like a comfy ergo chair where I'm just like. It's like a hard wooden chair. But yes, I found for doing things like putting on shoes and having more options for like comfort, wearing different pants and stuff, to just have a normal chair is quite practical. So I do have a normal chair because I live in society and I gotta go outside and stuff. All right, Reaper says the quintessential punk band is the UK Sex Pistols that wrote very controversial songs that negatively reference the Queen. Very, very bad back then. I guess cyberpunk is kind of anti-establishment. And Reaper says an anti-institutional in a similar way to the punk music of the time. Clockwork Orange is anti-institution, i.e. Thatcher government, in a similar way. So Reaper, I think this is a good ending comment, because as a challenge to that, I would say like all this cyberpunk stuff, is heavily promoted, and you could look at rock band, the punk music, the so-called counterculture movement, and say, does the establishment, is this actually counterculture, or is it kind of like given to people as counterculture? So I'll just use cyberpunk because I would say maybe I know more about cyberpunk than I do about rock music and the hippies and this sort of stuff. So with cyberpunk, for instance, of course, you got Facebook, Ready Player One, all these popular media that readily gets published, readily gets shared. Talking about how cyberpunk stuff is cool is not edgy whatsoever. Like, if you're talking about getting a bionic arm or something, I mean, maybe some of your relatives won't like to hear that very much. Like, there, of course, are obviously people that would be opposed to or not like that direction stuff is going in. But in terms of like looking at our institutions and stuff, I would say that a lot of the cyberpunk stuff is in fact actively encouraged as a way to say, oh, look, I'm embracing these like innovations in these ways, and that in this sense is not counterculture at all. Yeah, so then Reaper's making up a couple comments about the punk history. Yeah, so then another good point. Let me just tie this in too with cyberpunk, that sort of stuff. So I would say like one topic that me and a bunch of internet people have been talking about is like with computers, with the programmers, right? There's the so-called the industrial programmer. You know, you work at a big company like Microsoft or Google or something like that, and then you have the hobby programmer, you know, person that just likes code computers for the sake of computers, and they might be doing, you know, they might make 4chan board or whatever. They might do things that aren't at first the establishment doesn't like, but then eventually it will be subsumed and used by the big guys if it is useful to them. So maybe too, like with the punk stuff, we see a similar sort of thing where there is a lot of organic, like truly anti-establishment stuff in a way, but then over time you could see how, whether we're talking about like Reddit, 4chan, you know, whatever, BitTorrent, whatever we're talking about, that these things become used by the more powerful, bigger players. You could say they get bought out, they get taken over forcefully, whatever the mechanism is, such that the grains of resistance that were within these things get rooted out, and the true hobbies and stuff, then they're put at a crossroads. You know, do you kind of go along with the big changes, like me, Alan the Sellout, who's using YouTube, even though tons of people get kicked off YouTube and all that? Like, here I am, making a relatively YouTube channel, talking to you all on YouTube because I'm saying, you know, I don't think I could like beat the Matrix, so to speak. So instead, I'll try to use it to the best of my ability. And then, of course, you get a lot of other people who will never use YouTube, and instead they're trying to build like their own parallel digital infrastructure. So you could say these are two strategies to kind of deal with the fact that you have this structure, and you don't have just like your idea of freedom or whatever you want on YouTube. So do you kind of work within YouTube's parameters, try to make the best of that, or do you go off and fork off and try to make your alternative? Personally, I think for me at least, the better strategy is to try to be here on YouTube and to talk about what I want, but also too, I got to, you know, be careful, consider how YouTube operates, and respect their rules and guidelines. And then there's other people. You go on a site like Odyssey or BitChute or something like that, you'll find people that talk freely about some spicy topics. All right, couple comments and then we'll conclude. Reaper says, I think Blade Runner came from left field when it was released and set the stage for future aesthetics. If you wanted to say by the 1990s, cyberpunk was kind of sucked into anti-establishment memes. We might reference the movie Hackers. Then you might be getting warmer. All right, sounds like Reaper has some insights into this. Honestly, it's much easier to imagine punk music was co-opted and promoted in tyrannical governments, USSR Iron Curtain in the 80s, than cyberpunk was. But then again, a lot of what really goes on in cyberpunk fiction is always like the French Revolution by a ragtag team. In that sense, it actually isn't new at all. It's just people demand anti-heroes instead of establishment heroes. Perhaps the anti-hero meme is a good discussion point here, since it cuts across different genres, people, etc. Okay, yeah, we could look at the anti-hero. Maybe TV Tropes has an interesting page on that we could take a look at. And Hello says, cyberpunk authors meant these as cautionary tales about how tech would benefit the few instead of the many. Tech innovators are promoting the same innovations but mass marketing them. Yeah. So here, oh man, we're getting into interesting stuff. We're having our literature discussion club here. Right, we could look at how you could have the same symbols, the same words, the same images, but being used by different people for different purposes. Right, like one person might use the whole cyberpunk thing to promote an anti-hero narrative to try to make people stay motivated and feel that they have a voice, even if the big scary establishment is out there. And then you might get establishment people who are like, look, this is all actually really nice and cool. Just fall in line and conform. Who is this really bad? We've provided it all for you. And you could also like have a story where maybe someone starts as like a kind of anti-hero, but then at the end you're like, and then he loved Big Brother. Whatever you want to have for your story. We could see how using within a particular genre such as cyberpunk, you could have people making different points though navigating through the same symbols, familiar stuff, and trying to say different messages. All right, it has been a fun and animated stream here. I want to thank you all for joining, and I think we have a bunch of spicy topics lined up here. So maybe next stream, which will probably be Monday, we'll do very little Jacques Ellul reading, so we could talk about some of these interesting topics such as punks and anti-heroes and things like that. But then we should read at least a little bit of Jacques Ellul just to say we did. So at some point we could say something like, oh yeah, we did 500 consecutive streams and finally finished the book or something. That would be fun to say. So yeah. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Had a good time here and looking forward to the next stream. Thanks everyone for joining.